My hat is in the ring, TR announced in 1912 when he split the Republican Party right down the middle, going after the man he himself had installed as president in 1909, the entirely too judicious William Howard Taft. The lunatic fringe, another phrase coined by TR. He said, in all of my campaigns, among my supporters, there's always been an element of the lunatic fringe. And good to the last drop. Maxwell House is still selling its coffee 100 years later, was something that Teddy Roosevelt observed after smacking his lips and being overheard. TR once said, it is always better to be an original than an imitation. And whatever else he was clearly an American original. He remains, as his most recent biographer, Kathleen Dalton, says, America's most fascinating president. He was good copy. The press loved him. Edmund Morris quoted a newspaper man who, during a presidential vacation in Yellowstone National Park, commented that he was like the old faithful geyser. He could be counted on for intermittent but continuous spouting. At the age of 42, he was the youngest president in American history. John F. Kennedy, of course, is the youngest elected. TR became president through the assassination of William McKinley. He was a Renaissance man to a degree that I don't think we've ever seen in the White House. At various times in his amazingly varied young life, he'd been a rancher, a naturalist, an athlete, a boxer, a world traveler, a soldier, a civil service reformer, head of the New York City Police, governor of New York State, vice president of the United States. He was a prolific author. He was an original member of the American Institute of Arts and Letters, but he also founded the National Collegiate Athletic Association. So he was a man of thought and a man of action. His first book, The Summer Birds of the Adirondacks, was published when he was 19. He was still a Harvard undergrad when he wrote The Naval War of 1812, which is still regarded as the definitive work on that subject. He wrote book after book on a vast array of subjects. The History of the American West, his 4-volume, The Winning of the West, I recommend. It's a marvelous read. He wrote about his safaris, his exploration of the Brazilian wilderness. He was a boy who was not born in a log cabin, far from it. In some ways, he had lots of disadvantages because he began life in an environment about as different from that as could be. He is the only president to be born in New York City, born in a brownstone, not too far from Greenwich Village. His father, who, if you were here earlier, you heard about Theodore Roosevelt Sr., whom TR, again, from Pilgrim's Progress, always called Greatheart. Theodore Roosevelt Sr. was, by all accounts, a larger-than-life figure. His son, it's hard to believe, but his son spent a lifetime feeling that he never measured up to his father's greatness. And that may be one factor to explain something about him. He was a man of firsts. He was the first president to fly a plane, the first president to be submerged in a submarine, the first president to own a car, have a telephone, entertain an African American in the White House, the first American president to win a Nobel Peace Prize, and the first and only president to be born in a New York brownstone. As a boy, part of the reason why the Roosevelt legend, I think, still moves us, still inspires us, is that so many of us can relate to this puny, asthmatic child who refuses to surrender to ill health, who, following the advice of his father, decides to build his body as well as his mind. There are these marvelous, poignant stories of Greatheart in the middle of the night, his son almost dying from asthma, gasping for air, and his father would scoop him up in blankets and put him in a sleigh, and they would ride up and down New York streets, forcing the air into the boy's lungs, TD, as he was known to his siblings. He not only survived, but he ultimately triumphed. And I think that's the first thing about TR that makes him universal and timeless. As a boy, he saw Lincoln's funeral go by, the family home in New York, and he conceived an admiration for Lincoln that really never left him. As president, he wore a ring with a lock of Lincoln's hair in it. He was very much a Lincoln Republican. As a boy, he took boxing lessons, judo, something that he practiced all his life. In fact, years later in the White House, he kept it a secret. It was kept secret from everyone. He lost the sight of one eye while boxing in a ring set up in the East Room. He also was known to wrestle alligators, which is at least as bad as wrestling congressmen. He climbed the Matterhorn as a boy, not something that you would expect an asthmatic to be able to do. He was all about overcoming limits, and that makes him very American. He decided, as a young man, he said, I wanted to belong to the governing class. Well, he belonged to in effect, to the old elites of New York. And that, again, was the great disadvantage of being born where he was. He didn't want to be imprisoned in that class, in that culture. He wanted to understand, and ultimately he wanted to represent the emerging, more democratic America that he saw around him. So at first of all, he went to Harvard, where he was not democratized, but he met Alice Lee. And on his 22nd birthday, he married this bewitching woman who lived in Chestnut Hill, just outside of Boston. And they set up a home at Sagamore Hill. They bought 80 acres of land out on Long Island in Oyster Bay. And it was and is a magical place. It was a big house they built. They knew they wanted to have lots and lots of children. At 23, TR actually was made good on his pledge to go into politics. His friends from Harvard thought it was crazy. Why would you want to associate with barkeepers and Irish Democrats? And actually, that's a redundancy. I'm sorry. Anyway, why would you want to associate with all those politicians? And and not for the first time, TR was accused of being a traitor to his class. That runs in the family. Franklin would have that and worse things said about him. In any event, at the age of 23, he was elected to the New York legislature, and he was, from the beginning, a bit of an oddity, an exotic. He wasn't very tall. He had a high piping voice, a barrel chest. He didn't walk, he trotted. He was just full of energy. Henry Adams famously said that TR was pure act, energy in motion. He was also, from the beginning, a reformer, and that's the key. TR is a reformer, but he's a conservative reformer. If you want a historical analogy, think of Benjamin Disraeli, the great British Prime Minister, who was leader of the Conservative Party, but who believed in what he called one nation conservatism. He believed that conservative reformers had a unique opportunity and really obligation to open the window on society, to let in fresh air, to make certain that the masses felt that they were part of a genuinely just, economically democratic system. And because if you didn't reform from a conservative viewpoint, if the window was never opened, then ultimately one day there would be a true revolution and the radicals would take over. TR is very much a Disraeli conservative. He's a reformer, but at this stage of his career. Now later on, he'll become much more of a radical.